Welcome back to Let's Talk Tax. I'm Dave McGuire. Today we're discussing why CPAs often miss growth conversations with their clients and how they can reinsert themselves back into these conversations. Today I'm here with Brian Szymanski and Ben Worrell from McGuire Sponsol's Location Advisory Services team. Welcome, Brian and Ben.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, David. Happy to be here.
Before we get started, I know most of our viewers have met Ben before. He's been on these many times. Brian, a lot of people might not have as much knowledge in you. So give us a little bit of your background. Tell us where you came from and how you ended up in the location advisories practice.
I am a CPA. I'm licensed in Illinois. And when I graduated IU, I actually joined a top 10 CPA firm in Chicago. So I got my start in state and local tax, spent about 2 years there, and then started working within their credits and incentives group and got more exposure to the retroactive credit studies. And then that turned into continuing to expand their credits and incentives practice over the next 10 years. I worked on projects throughout the country for small, let's call it 50 million revenue businesses all the way up to the Fortune 100.
Well, it's great to have you, and it's great to have some of that experience on this team. So often when we're talking about growth, obviously there's a lot of opportunities in growth, and there's a lot of money that states and local governments are putting out there. We hear about it in the news all the time. But I feel like sometimes CPAs miss the opportunity to have those conversations up front with their clients. And I guess one of the things we want to talk about is how we can get the CPA back to the table in some of those conversations. So maybe this is a question for both of you. Do you see that this is something that people miss out on, and maybe by the time they know what's going on with their clients, it's too late for some of these conversations?
We see it all the time, don't we?
Absolutely. And as I mentioned in part of my experience with doing retroactive credit reviews, that is often the case because from a CPA standpoint, they're assisting with tax compliance and auditing, right? And both those services are how do we keep a company or a business in compliance with the respective, federal and state laws, and making sure that they are in compliance and that they are trying to effectively reduce their tax rate. So from a kickoff standpoint, I feel like on the CPA side, there's a lot of focus on, what have they done over the past year? So how are we getting them into compliance, and how are we effectively planning from a nexus standpoint, understanding where their locations are, but again, that's all as of 12/31 of the prior year. So you get tied up in busy season. It's all about getting the returns filed, and oftentimes the simple questions of, hey, tell me more about your business and what are the challenges that you guys have been facing over the past year, and what are you looking to do with that over the next year? That simple question kind of changes the focus from a planning standpoint, and making sure that they are in front of any of the conversations that are going on throughout the rest of the company.
But that can be an absolute paradigm shift for the CPA and for their client, because if you can ask that question, if you're able to sit down and put on that strategic advisor mindset, all of a sudden the amount of incentives that you can unlock, because we hear about it all the time, but the key is staying in front of it. And when a client is moving forward and the CPA is not involved with it, oftentimes they will miss that opportunity.
So what are some of the questions that should be asked as a business is thinking about, okay, I'm thinking about expanding. Or maybe it's expanding in the state I'm in. Maybe it's expanding somewhere else. What are some of those key questions that really they're thinking about that the CPA firm might not even know about?
I know from our standpoint, we actually just had a call just this morning, ironically enough, that longtime client of a CPA had mentioned before. The CPA had asked the question, yes, what are you looking to do in the future? And they said, well, we have to find a new place. We have to expand a new building sometime in the future, but we're just not sure when. And so the CPA would continually follow up with them, just asking that question at the common points, the points in time that you talked about, Brian. Lo and behold, after 9 months of following up, we finally get to a point where they say, we found a building and we're getting ready to move forward with it. So thankfully, we're still in front of that process. But if we had just waited till after tax season and even after a little bit further into the summertime, we probably would have missed out on that opportunity. And at this point in time, for this particular client, we're probably looking at north of $1 million in incentives just off the bat. We're still collecting details on the project and what could happen there. But between the estimated net new job investment, how much is going into the building itself, some renovations, some new equipment, all those types of things, which are those early questions that we need to be asking about during that growth conversation. What could this look like? Breaking all those components down. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to sniff at $1 million.
Ben, you mentioned in that situation, being in front is critical. And I guess, obviously, Brian, you came from the CPA background. Ben, you're from the incentives background. So explain to me a little bit more why, because I'm coming from the tax background. So I don't care when somebody calls me. If I'm doing a cost seg study on it, it doesn't matter if they built the building a week ago, next year, or 3 years ago. I can still work with them. Why is that timing so critical on the location side of things?
Well, from the credits incentives location advisory side, so often there is actually a legal statute called a but-for clause in so many different states. Brian, you're well familiar with this in Illinois because they're very strict on the but-for clause in Illinois. But for the offer of incentives, the project would not move forward. So if the incentives help make the project happen is the key to that. And you have to prove that by saying, okay, we haven't made these key decisions. We haven't made the purchase agreement yet. We haven't signed the lease agreement. We haven't hired those employees. We haven't actually purchased or placed in service that equipment yet. We're waiting because we'd like to do it in this location, but we could do it in another location, whether that's outside the state, outside the county, outside of the city, or just down the street at another option. We have to be in front of those specific decisions so that we can have the leverage to be able to maximize the incentives.
Yeah, not to mention also with that, from a but-for standpoint, I think probably at least a dozen times I've seen companies and clients get tripped up. It may not be that they filed for a permit yet, right? But it could be that the company's CEO or marketing team was actually doing a site visit and sitting down with the local government just to get a better understanding of, hey, do we have enough available workforce? Is this the right place from a work-life balance? Is this where we want to be when we open up our next location, or if we're shifting operations? And I've had a couple instances where then as we've tried to move that project forward, they said, hey, by the way, the governor's already aware of this, or the mayor's already aware of this project. As a result, you're not going to be able to apply for these incentives because there's no more question of whether or not this project would not happen, right, without those incentives. So Illinois has a very strict one you have to sign off on. New Jersey actually has an attestation statement where you actually have to say that these incentives are the reason, and the CEO has to sign off on it. So when we evaluate incentive opportunities, we align with our clients, we're taking a look at when are all those major milestones happening so we can help them understand, here's the line in the sand. We don't want to go past that, or you don't want to get past that before we have a chance to sit down and have that initial conversation, or we need to get through an application, or we need to have approval prior to you actually completing that step for your expansion.
And if you start to work backwards in the timeline from that, if your decision is, hey, we really need to sign this purchase agreement probably by July, then if we start working backwards to say, okay, then let's work back 60 to 90 days, maybe even 120 days, depending on the state and all the compliance, the application process, if there's local bodies of government that you have to go through to try to get a resolution document that then unlocks the tool that is the incentive at the end of the day. We've got to make sure we're in front of all that. So oftentimes we like to say if we can be at least 60 to 90 days in front of those final decisions, which if you think about it, in a lot of these circumstances, if a business is moving forward, even if they've already identified a building, there's still a due diligence period that aligns very specifically with that. The challenge, again, is that oftentimes clients are not thinking, I should reach out to my CPA and ask them about what they think of this process. Usually it's, and we joke with our CPA partners all the time, we're the last ones to find out about anything that our clients are doing because it's going to be asking that question, what happened last year? So if the CPAs can start to shift that mentality and start asking in that Q4 discussion question, not just what happened over the last year, but what could happen in the following year, that's when we can start positioning and say, well, our clients mentioned that they are looking at growth. Okay, great. That's when we need to be contacted because we can start following up on these next questions. But that trigger point, when growth conversations are starting to happen, we've got to get involved very quickly.
Now, I want to put a pin in that because I think in a minute I want to come back to some of those questions that the CPAs come to. But before we get there, a couple things that you both brought up that I just want to dive into and make sure that I understand it. So you mentioned the but-for clause. Now, and I just want to confirm, Ben, you mentioned that this project wouldn't have taken place, but it's in that specific locality. So let's say I've got a very well-financed business, and I don't necessarily need the incentives, but I could put my business anywhere. It's not, I don't need the incentives to start the business, but I might need the incentives to be in that location. Is that the correct way of interpreting it?
Yeah, it's one of those ways. It's also a way to look at it to say, what is your plan for the next 5 years into the future from an investment standpoint, job creation standpoint, all those kinds of things? And do these incentives help to close the gap to make that achievement happen sooner, happen faster? And what does that therefore do for your business model? If you're trying to meet a contract obligation that's out there to produce a certain number of widgets that are then going to be able to go out the door, if you can do that faster, you beat out your competition at that point in time. You're able to gain more ground inside the marketplace. So these incentives actually help accelerate growth in so many different circumstances. I mean, we have conversations with clients afterwards all the time as we're going through all the compliance process on the back end where they said, gosh, what we thought we were able to do over 5 years, we actually just did in 3. And so now you can start accelerating that growth opportunity in the future, which is exactly what economic credits and incentives are designed to do.
As you're going through that, I'm thinking through my head. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm a business owner. Let's say I decide I want to expand my manufacturing operations in Omaha, Nebraska. Just making up. I have no idea if Omaha's good incentives or not. It was the first city that came to mind.
Sure.
And a building comes open. I know if I'm buying a house, sometimes the real estate agent will say, you know what, you need to put an offer in tonight or we might lose this. As you're negotiating these incentives, does anybody ever slow down to the point where you might lose it? Or can you get to a point where you can at least file the paperwork and say, oh, no, you can still accelerate that process?
So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different ways you can approach that. I'd say, number one, if the client reaches out to us early and they say, hey, we've identified this building and the current property owner has asked that we put in our bid, within the next 2 weeks, one way to navigate around this but-for clause would be to work with the real estate agent to put in some additional language within the agreement that says, hey, as part of this due diligence process, we are going to explore economic development incentives, state and local level, and sometimes at the federal level, but that is going to be part of our process, and we want you to be aware of that we are going to go after these incentives. So by putting in that language, basically it's creating a clause that the company could back out of that purchase contract, right? If they are unsuccessful with incentives. That in the past has been enough to provide enough level of comfort to the state and local economic development agencies that is enough to meet that but-for test.
Often called a contingency clause.
Yes.
Now, some landlords may be a little squeamish about that at first. Maybe like, okay, are you backing out of the deal? No, we're not, but we're trying to make sure that we can adhere to the letter of the law, work inside this, and maximize the value of the incentives that help us be a long-term tenant here, hopefully.
That's right.
Well, that's great that there's people like you guys that know those things and can work within the organization. I think as we're sitting there, and you see it when you're buying a house, and just having the right counsel whenever you're doing anything is important. And I think you just pointed out a great reason why, Brian. So let's kind of slide back to the CPA firm. So as CPA firms are sitting down with their clients, what are some of as they're going through planning and talking to them, what are some of the trigger points that they should be looking for? What are some of the questions that they should be asking just to know, is this something I should be considering and bringing up or bringing the two of you to the conversation?
It's helpful if the CPAs are asking about what is the company doing from a capital investment standpoint, so looking at their capital plan over the next 3 to 5 years. That's both from a real estate standpoint and a personal property standpoint and equipment. What are they looking at from a headcount standpoint? Are they looking to add jobs? Are they looking to possibly reduce or transfer jobs? And are they looking to invest in training?
And if CPA is looking at kind of, okay, I've got a lot of clients that are out here, or this might not apply for everyone. What's that short list look like? I think certainly anything having to do with manufacturing, headquarters, technology development, R&D, all those types of things that are things that McGuire Sponsor is well familiar with. All of those areas are great industries for us to be involved with from an incentive standpoint, because they typically are doing some sort of hiring, some sort of new equipment. They're investing inside the companies all the time. Another thing to look at is any businesses that have probably multiple locations, especially if it crosses a state line. If I've got an operation in Indianapolis, Indiana, and another one in Omaha, Nebraska, since that was brought up before, okay, let's start playing those against each other, especially if you just see organic growth that's happening year over year. Maybe there's not like a strong initiative that's going on right now. We have to hit this contract, but we've just seen steady growth to keep up with the market, keep up with demand out there. And so we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of any and all credits and incentives across the states. Let's do that. McGuire Sponsor, we've done that ourselves. Previous conversations, TJ's talked about how we've continued to grow here in our headquarters, but we've got offices now across the U.S., and we've been able to look at these opportunities for those other states as well.
So to your example, so if you're saying if I have a client, you used Indianapolis and Omaha, and we're adding a manufacturing line. We're going to need to hire 30 to 50 people to do it, even though we're not building a new facility, but we're adding that line and we can choose which location. You're saying that's a good opportunity, even though we're not building a brand new facility?
And I think that's a great opportunity for a CPA to step in and say, well, let's consider the further tax implications. If we're adding equipment inside of Nebraska versus Indiana, is there a better state to do that in, just from a simple tax standpoint? Now we start to layer in the incentives, and that's just icing on the cake at that point in time. It's a good business decision. It's a good business model to follow, and now we've got even more to add to it.
Yeah, I think we've even had the conversation with our R&D team with the states that are not following 174 on the R&D side, and obviously bonus depreciation at backs, and now the QPP. I think the state implications of some of these tax items are going to actually lead the way. You couple that with where the best incentives are. I think having those planning conversations is critical moving forward.
And the CPAs are ideal to do that.
Now, Brian, I know you were in the CPA industry. Obviously, we can overwhelm with questions and be calling our clients every 3 days and saying, "Hey, did you change your mind? Are you going to expand? Hey, are you going to buy a facility?" How often should they be having these? And are there key times where you're already sitting down with the client having a conversation where you can kind of filter this into the conversation?
So, typically from the CPA standpoint, when CPAs are evaluating or meeting with companies on a quarterly basis from an estimate standpoint, or they're kicking off year-end planning or kicking off the next year from a planning standpoint, they should be asking all these questions about capital investment, jobs, location, any changes to your business, and what are the potential challenges that you guys are facing. I think another incentive program that's also out there that we didn't touch on, but from a client standpoint, is what are your ESG initiatives? Are you investing in going green? Is there a way that we could touch on, providing utility savings-based incentives? So it's not your traditional go after jobs and investment, but it adds additional savings to the bottom line from an operating standpoint.
Answer maybe yes or no. Do you ever get into looking at the ability for the utilities to be available to people, or is that a side business that would have to be there?
Oh, it's an inherent part of location advisory. If it's a manufacturing operation, they have to have power. Sometimes there's other specialty uses, gas, water, all those types of things. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm just curious how often you see that kind of thing, because I know that's more and more. We hear about it. Obviously, you pick up the newspaper today, you're going to hear about it with data centers.
Yes.
But it's going to be with any type of business. Manufacturing says they automate more. Takes more power. As you do other things, it takes more power and energy. So I was just curious how often you see that come up in a conversation.
Well, and that gets a lot more kind of migrating from the location advisory services that we have to now our site selection piece, where a client truly says, I don't know where we need to be, but we're ready for growth and expansion. Or maybe they have an idea. We're over here, west of the Rockies right now, and we need to be on the East Coast. what's the best state for incentives out there? And we usually say, hey, time out, that's a good question, but we've got some other ones we want to ask first. What are those things that are key drivers for your business growth model right now? Is it utility costs? Well, okay, well, then it may pull you closer to the south, or is it proximity to suppliers? Is it having access to a port? Is it a certain job skill set that you need to have a university nearby that's minting fresh grads out every single year that you can tap into from a labor pool so that you can continue to grow and be successful with this next opportunity? So yes, utilities have come up a lot here recently, but when we get into site selection, there's a lot more questions that we like to be asking, and which honestly for us is really fun part of all that, because now we're trying to align all these different areas, all these different states, municipalities, counties, everything that's out there to say what's going to drive the maximum value for this client.
Sitting back and we think about CPAs often, we think about them around tax time. We go, I need my tax return done. I need my K-1s. I need this. However, as somebody who's worked in the CPA industry for 20 years myself, I know it's, I should say, actually, it's 30 years. I just realized that. Anybody who's listening just knows that I just realized that I worked in the CPA industry 30 years, not 20. But as somebody who's worked in the CPA industry almost 30 years, they're beyond that. They're business consultants, and they want to do that. So how do they see this? Would you see this as a new business unit for them, or just an expansion of what they're already doing by advising their clients?
I'd say it's a great starting place. If you've not done it before, this is a great area just to ask an additional couple of questions to say, okay, is this an opportunity here for my clients and for me to get more ingrained as a strategic business advisor for my clients, therefore helping them grow in the future and retaining that client for a longer period of time? Absolutely. If you've got more experience and familiarity, yes, it's a differentiator in the marketplace. If you're not doing this right now, know that there are other groups that are out there that do that. Again, Brian, you spoke about your experience with another larger top 10 firm.
Yep.
Now, can you give me just maybe make up an example or give me a real world example? Just want to give people an idea of the order of magnitude of what we're talking about in terms of dollars.
Yeah. So in most cases, we like to estimate between 5 and 10% of the investment value is what clients can realize in incentive savings. Now, it's okay, Ben, you just talked about the investment side. What about the job side? Well, jobs may be icing on top of that. It's just a nice way for us to say, hey, if you're talking with a client, you've got a business owner, he's saying, look, I'm going to grow and expand. I probably need to knock out that wall. I need to add another 50,000 square feet of space. I'm going to put a new equipment line in there. Okay, what's your budget looking like for that? $10 million or so. Okay, we can quickly move the decimal place on that one and say, I think this might be worth about $1 million in incentives. Does that move the needle for you? I think in most cases, people are going to say, yes, absolutely. Tell me more. Well, let's get you connected to our incentives provider. They can advise you a little bit more on what that actually looks like. And then Brian and I and our team can start tearing that apart a little bit further, getting really granular to try and determine, okay, if this project is happening in this location and doing these things, here's what that value could look like for you. We're here to help actually pursue that and then draw down on that ROI.
As somebody who works at the CPA industry, I would think that would excite people, but it would also scare people. And Brian, I'd be interested in your thoughts, because as sitting there and working in the consulting industry, it's one thing to bring somebody, in your example, Ben, where you said $1 million on a piece of equipment. It's another thing for somebody to come in and go, you know what? If you had worked with our firm, we could have brought you $1 million because you didn't, and you worked with firm ABC down the street. You missed out on $1 million. So I think that point, Ben, in my mind, and Brian, you can tell me if you disagree, but I think it really drives it home why CPAs need to access this, because if the guy down the street does, they've got an easy way in on your clients.
That's exactly it. From an incentive standpoint, you're there to help bring value based off of what that company is doing. I've seen it multiple times in the past where by the time the client has already made the announcement, if they've engaged with somebody else, we may be working on their tax return, right, and find out that, hey, they secured, a pretty standard incentive offer from, like the state of Georgia. Well, had they engaged with us or engaged with, our LAS team, we probably could have identified ways that we could expand that incentive value. And sometimes we've been successful in going back and renegotiating a deal if we're able to get introduced early enough on. So there have been times where you can salvage maybe what was done by a different service provider, or that was missed, perhaps because the client applied by themselves.
Well, thank you both. Before we wrap up, I know we're getting tight on time, but is there any closing thoughts or things that you would want to make sure that the people listening, just if they could only pull one or two things out of this conversation, that they would pull away?
My comment would be, and I've said this before, we can never be too early in the conversation. We can be too late. And so the earlier we get brought into the growth conversation, maybe it's not a decision that happens for another 2 years, but you've at least planted the seed at that point in time so that we don't miss out. We've got now active follow-up steps, points in time, whether it's a quarterly follow-up, just to say, hey, you mentioned this growth and expansion project in the past. How much closer are you guys towards making a final decision towards that? Have you secured the financing? We can never be too early. We can't be too late.
Yep. And then just always asking the client questions about what's going on with your business. What are your challenges and what are your future opportunities? Where are you looking to go next?
Well, I appreciate those watching today. Brian, Ben, thank you for your time. I would advise anybody that's listening that really anything that met with them today, if they've got any questions, feel free to reach out to either one of you or anyone here at McGuire Sponsor, and we can help talk about how to help integrate these into your CPA practice.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.